But before we start, please take a moment to give this video a like, subscribe to Happy World, and hit the bell so you'll never miss these great stories.
That was one of the coldest nights of the Wisconsin winter, and Charlie Spencer couldn't sleep. He'd always been a light sleeper, but lately it had become a real ordeal. He looked out of the window to check if it was still snowing, and it was, my God, when is it gonna stop snowing? Charlie cursed himself as he took off his pajamas and put on warm clothes. No one in their right mind would have gone for a walk in the middle of the night in those conditions, but Charlie wasn't just anyone. His perception of fear was different from that of others. Ever since his mother and grandmother died in a tragic car accident, he'd been completely alone in the world and felt there was nothing else to fear. His loneliness was his refuge, his most faithful companion. He was only 25, but he had lived the kind of life that makes innocence and youth fade quickly. While snow won't hurt me, the cold clears the mind, said Charlie, going outside trying to protect his face with a scarf he was wearing. The truth was that the snowfall that year had been heavier than ever in Wisconsin. People had even died. Charlie had spent entire days indoors alone and with only company of his drawings. Charlie was a comic book illustrator, and he didn't need to move to work and to his way of thinking. He didn't need to communicate with anyone but his editor to survive, although if he'd been out on the street of Bend, it wouldn't have made much difference either. He hardly spoke to anyone. He knew that his neighbors were watching him and whispering behind his back. There were some who were even afraid of him. Last week he overheard the neighbor in the room tell her 5-year-old daughter not to go near him under any circumstances, and all because he was a boy who didn't talk much. He was very shy. That was all. He was a bad person. He'd just been unlucky, and you don't have to be dark-skinned to be unlucky. Anyone who's ever experienced it knows that on his evening stroll, Charlie didn't run into anyone, and actually that was a relief. He didn't want any more prying eyes. He just wanted to walk and get lost in the city, even if the cold and snow prevented him from feeling his tongues. He walked for several hours. The snow was getting thicker and thicker, and he could hardly walk without slipping, but he didn't stop that night. Charlie felt a strange need to walk and stop at nothing. He wants several more kilometers through the deserted streets in around 4 o'clock in the morning. He realized he wasn't alone that night. Someone else decided to tempt fate by going out into the street in the store at the end of the street. There was someone lying on the ground in the darkness and snow. Charlie couldn't see clearly who it was or if the person was conscious. He rushed over as fast as he could to check. It was an old woman lying on the ground, her eyes covered in snow. She was shivering and barely noticed that Charlie had reached her. "Ma'am, are you all right? Can you hear me? Are you in pain?" Charles S., consistently speaking as loudly as he could. "My ankle. I think I twisted it. It was a silly fall. I never fall down. You know, it's just absurd snow that makes people clumsy and fearful." The old woman spoke in his sweet, loving voice and looked at Charlie. In the same way, the woman looked exhausted, but otherwise seemed fine. Charlie carefully helped her up. She could barely stand. "Don't worry, young man will be fine. You've done enough. I can manage on my own." The sweet old lady told him, smiling sweetly, so he wouldn't worry, but Charlie was worried. Looking at that woman brought back many memories, and they were all good ones. In the look of that mysterious and sweet woman, he could find the affection of the woman he'd loved the most in his life. His grandmother, seeing her there alone, unable to walk in the middle of a snowstorm, made his heart shrink. "No way, Mom. I'm not leaving. Tell me where you live, and I'll take you. Are you sure? My house is nowhere here. You will have to carry me for a long time. I'll gladly do it. Don't worry. I'm young and feel an obligation to help you. I really do. Tell me where I'm taking you." "Thank you very much. You're a sweetheart. But first let me tell you my name. It's Molly Brown. You're gonna now walk together in the snow. I think we should at least know each other's names. You're Ryan Molly. My name is Charlie Spencer. It's a pleasure to meet you, although I would have liked to meet you under different circumstances. And why would these circumstances be the wrong ones? Everything that's happening is part of a grand plan that we don't yet understand. If we're here, it's because it was meant to be, and I'm thankful for that. Otherwise, I would still be lying over there. And if I could have helped her, I tell you that from my heart, tell me the course, Molly, I'll protect you." The old woman gave him directions, and they began to walk slowly in the middle of the night, with hundreds of snowflakes falling on their hands. Charlie looked at her tenderly. This woman was a complete stranger of whom he only knew her name and address, but he felt like he'd known her all his life. It was as if his grandmother had been with him again. The car accident in which his mother and grandma died had left him devastated, with no one to turn to when he needed help, and yet now he felt her so close and didn't understand why. On the way back to Molly's house, they kept talking. The old woman was right. Her house was quite far away, and even though Charlie could no longer feel his toes or fingers, you could barely feel the tip of his nose. That walk arm in arm with a complete stranger seemed the most warm and comforting thing he'd felt in a long time. Molly turned out to be a fascinating woman, as well as being sweet and understanding. Charlie told her all about himself, which was unusual for him, as he always kept quiet and avoided talking to people. He explained everything he'd lived through in his current way of life, even when he didn't dare to say out loud to himself. Charlie confessed his child abuse by his father, and how his mother and grandmother had to flee with him from a homework, pain, and fear raid. Finally, they arrived at the address Molly had given him. It was hardly snowing anymore, and the night was winding down, the sun about to rise over the horizon. When Charlie looked up to see where they had arrived, he couldn't believe it. It was a huge, beautiful mansion. The snow and darkness had kept him from seeing where they were going, but he was sure he'd never been in this part of town before. Molly was still limping, but she laughed when she saw the young Charlie's astonished face. "It's just a house, nothing more, come on." My guest Charlie was caught completely off guard by that invitation. "I won't come in if you don't," Molly said with a mischievous look. Charlie couldn't refuse any longer and went in with her. As he entered, a young woman came running to Molly's aid. The old woman kindly refused her help and sat down on a small sofa near the entrance. "I'm all right, Megan. This nice young man saved me and very kindly brought me here. I found I like to walk at night, but the stretcher snow got the best of me. I told you not to go out at night by yourself, especially when it's snowing." This woman never stops coming trouble, so the young woman very annoyed. While she checked that Molly was not missing any vital organs, since she had all her things, my heart's still beating. If that's what you're worried about, my wallet, don't look for it. I don't have anything valuable on me. I don't need money to think about how old I am while I'm taking a walk. You're so stubborn, Granny, she said as she kissed her cheek and held her hands affectionately. "I'll make some tea. Would you like a cup?" She now looked at Charlie, who hadn't said a word since her entrance. "Yes, of course, that would be wonderful," Charlie stammered. Molly's granddaughter beauty left him speechless. His lack of socializing was becoming more and more noticeable, and his palms were getting sweaty. Megan went into what would surely be the kitchen, left alone. Molly asked Charlie to sit next to her. The old woman looked really exhausted, but her eyes radiated a strange youthfulness. They were full of light. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through, Charlie. No child should have to fear his father, let alone have to defend his mother from him. Fear breaks us inside little by little and annuls us as human beings, and I'm sure that the shyness of yours, this fear of showing yourself, is nothing more than a regrettable consequence of a truncated childhood." Molly was really touched. Charlie's story left her very affected. "That's right, but I could save myself. I've also been lucky." Charlie was also moved, telling all his story to that woman had made him remember very painful things. Love saved you as it saves a song. Your mother and grandmother sacrificed himself for you, and you will live eternally grateful for it. In fact, you remind me a lot of my grandmother. She has such a cheerful look, so full of hope. Looking at you has been like having her back with me, and you have it too, Charlie. You just have to stop and look a little better, really. Someone else wouldn't have bothered to help me the way you have. You're full of love to give, but you're overcome with fear and sadness. Maybe you're right. Charlie looked down and thought about it. He never felt so calm, and all thanks to a woman. He barely knew Charlie. "Can I give you a gift?" "You want to do something for me, of course, as a thank you for what you've done for me, and because I think you need it more than I do. What do you mean you've come into this big house full of luxuries and comforts, and you haven't asked me the most obvious question? What do I do for a living? Whose wife am I? How much money do I have? Nothing. Not a single question, which shows me how humble you are, and that I'm not wrong about you. So let me give you the most precious of my possessions. And what is it? Music. Everything you see is mine. I'm the widow of a man I loved all my life, and who gave me 3 beautiful daughters. But what has really made me happy and complete as a person is music, playing the piano and composing beautiful melodies. Are you a pianist? I'd love to hear you play. I don't play much anymore. My bones don't allow me to, honey. My granddaughter plays for me. She's very good. I'm sure she'll go far. But today I'll make an exception. Help me out." Charlie helped Molly up, and she led him into a large room in the center of the house. With a beautiful grand piano in the center, Molly sat down in front of it, and Charlie stood beside her waiting. Music is able to speak without words and touch our hearts without having to use our hands. My music is my gift. Molly began to play a beautiful melody. Charlie never heard it before, but it sounded like the sweetest thing he'd ever heard. His eyes filled with tears and his heart was pounding when she finished. Molly was exhausted but smiling. "Nuvola Bianchi" by Ludovico Einaudi. Beautiful, isn't it? After that day, and after having spent the rest of the morning sharing their stories by the piano and accompanied by a nice cup of tea and pastries, Charlie said goodbye to Molly. He didn't want to part with a fine woman he'd been lucky enough to know, but he had to get back to his life, which now suddenly seemed less gloomy. "I'll never forget what you've done for me today. Molly, you and your music are a gift from heaven. Will we see each other again? I don't think so. Go on your way and don't be afraid. You have been a blessing to me too." Charlie didn't quite understand Molly's words, but he accepted it and left. After that day, Charlie never heard from her again. Nor did he ever set foot in that house, but he could never forget Molly, her music and words. One afternoon on his way home, Charlie saw a giant poster advertising a great classical music concert. The concert would feature a piano soloist, Megan Brown. That's Molly's granddaughter. "I have to go to that concert," Charlie shouted excitedly when he saw the poster. Charlie bought a ticket for that very night. As he entered the auditorium, he was given the concert program, and his heart stomped. Molly Brown Memorial Concert, and further down among the list of pieces that were to be performed, Nuvola Bianchi Ludovico Einaudi there. It was the beast that Molly played for him when they first met. Molly was gone. She already knew that when they talked he could tell she was saying goodbye, and he gave her the most important thing. She had her music to him. A stranger, his eyes filled with tears, and as he heard her granddaughter play that piece on the piano, he felt his heart cry too. As he left, Charles was very saddened by Molly's death, but he also felt that pains. "Thank you, Molly. I understand now. Your music will always be with me and guide me to a life away from fear," Charlie said, looking up at the sky, smiling with tears in his eyes. Never again was he a shy young man. Never again were his neighbors afraid of him. Molly's light, her warmth, and her generosity gave him hope again, and now he had a lifetime to return the favor.